Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast with me, Madeleine Black, where I am speaking to people that I have met along my own journey that have bounced back after adversity and they're now making a difference for other people. Today, my guest is someone that I haven't actually met before, but somebody tagged me in his post on Facebook because they knew it was exactly the kind of story that I love, and I know you will too. So today I'm going to speak to Adam Smith. Adam Smith was the founder and co-director of the visionary multi-award-winning global initiative, the Real Junk Food Project, TRJFP for short, set up in December 2013 to revolutionise the disposal of avoidable food waste into landfill. The pioneering movement's manifesto is to feed bellies, not bins. A professional chef for over 10 years, Adam has held a wealth of head chef positions internationally. Whilst in Australia, he witnessed the scale of food waste, agriculturally and within the catering industry. Upon his return to the UK, he was inspired to set up TRJFP. Adam and TRJFP have received numerous plaudits and awards from organisations ranging from NESTA to The Observer. In 2014, he was voted one of the 40 most influential men in the world by AskMen. The Telegraph voted Adam as one of the 50th most influential people in the UK Food and Drink Power List 2017. He has also featured on a TEDx broadcast from Warwick University in February 2015. Adam, good morning and welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Morning, Madeleine. Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, as my show is called Unbroken, the first question that I always ask all of my guests is, what does that word unbroken mean to you?
Unbroken, wow. Maybe, wow, that kind of put me on the spot a little bit. I think it's, unbroken, maybe people that have been to, the depths that maybe I've been to and are still here to tell the story. And no matter what life threw at me, to potentially break me and even further than breaking me, I'm still here to tell the story. So I guess I think the first thing that came to my mind when you said unbroken then was there's a picture of some like Japanese pottery. I don't know,
yes.
they weld it back together with gold to make it more valuable, and I think that
I think it's called.
Is that what it's called? Yeah. So that's the first thing that came into my mind, and is in like you become more valuable the more broken you become and the more you prepared yourself so that you are in a position where you are unbroken. I think that's quite a powerful and empowering place to be.
It's beautiful symbolism, isn't it? The broken pot filled in with gold. I love that.
Yeah.
So the post that somebody alerted me to was a contrasting post that you had put. So can we go back to, I think it was 2010 when you were 25, is that right?
Yeah.
You were pronounced dead on the scene by the police.
Pretty much, yeah. There's a lot of people asking me questions around that situation, and I think what you've got to put into context is it was a very fragile moment for a lot of people involved. And obviously I'm first aid trained now, so I know that at the first point of first aid you don't check people's pulse, but I think my pulse was checked by the police officers that found me in the car. I'd been sucking on exhaustions for several hours. I think it's between 10 and 16 hours. And my skin had completely turned black, and they had to smash me out of the car. So it's quite a heated situation, quite a fragile moment. And they just missed my heartbeat. I had class A drugs in my system, which was just about keeping my heart beating. My heartbeat
was cocaine was keeping your heart beating when you were
pretty much, yeah. And and they pronounced me dead at the scene. I guess just in a flash of the moment kind of thing, got me to hospital, and I think it was about 2 to 3 days where I had to recover, and my skin was completely black. And yeah, when I came round, the nurses explained to me the situation and said, you were pronounced dead, and that they thought that they were bringing a dead body into the hospital, and you were just about keeping your heart beating, so they didn't think you'd survive, and so yeah, I was literally, I'd gone, I'd been in that car for a long time, and I was completely unconscious, obviously. So yeah, I was unfortunately pronounced dead at the scene. Obviously, then the paramedics and the hospital staff, the main hospital staff, took over and managed to bring me back round after 2 to 3 days.
And can you say what led to you attempting suicide in those moments?
Yeah, it's really easy actually, because I've been speaking to a lot of people about trauma and the points of trauma, and I do a lot of work now with young people and a lot of work with homelessness, because I was homeless as well at one point in my life. But there was a specific moment in time when I was 10 years old where my dad had committed an act of domestic violence against my mum on a Christmas morning, and I was woken up by the police and taken past all my presents, and I still see the image of all the presents in my, walking past the lounge door and seeing them all piled up with me and my sister's presents in our piles. And yeah, that was Christmas '95 when I was just around 10, I think I was. So I just turned 10. And then there was a series of events that obviously led up to the attempt. And just before that, I'd just cheated on my partner at the time. I was a completely volatile and irrational, self-destructive person, substance abuse and all sorts of trauma that I'd never dealt with. And yeah, I wasn't a nice person to be around, and I cheated on my partner at the time, and then I tried to commit the act of suicide, and a lot of people felt like it was a consequence to me being found out by my partner at the time. But you know, now looking back on it and reflecting and going through PTSD therapy and everything, you know, this was just the camel, you know, the straw that brought the camel's back. It was that point of trauma that led to all these self-destructive ways until I got to that point. And you know, I've done some research with some homeless groups around point of trauma, around people becoming homeless, and some of the people becoming homeless up to 10 years after the point of trauma. And I don't think we do enough work in preventive work in young people, especially around how trauma affects young people. And I think at the time, around 95, you know, it was the boom of the divorce time. And I speak to people now of a similar generation to me, where all our parents were just getting divorced, and it was kind of like the cool thing to do. And I don't think people just truly understood what impact it had on young people. You know, we were all dismissed as, oh, just kids, whereas we were sponges for everything that went on around us, and we soaked it up. And you know, these people who were meant to be role models to us were turning into people that, you know, we were probably confused about. And I knew nothing different. I knew nothing different but to cheat and drink and act violently towards people, because that's all I'd been brought up with. That was my role model. So it was incredibly confusing times. And yeah, it was just from that moment onwards, because it wasn't dealt with properly. You know, this was kind of pre-discussions around mental health. You know, CAMS was around, mental health in young people was around, and all that stuff, but it wasn't anything like it is now. And it was just kind of, you know, it'll be fine, put him in school, everything will be fine, and it just wasn't. You know, I started to run away from home. I become highly sexualized at a very young age. I ended up in care, I ended up in prison, I ended up in a section to...
And you say it all so matter-of-factly, you know, like you're just lifting a capital. Oh, I ended up in care, I ended up in prison, I ended up homeless, like it's nothing to you now, but it's each one of those stages is huge.
Yeah, and I'm writing a book at the moment around my life, obviously, and off the back of the post that you mentioned. And you know, I really had to associate myself with that person again, because I had removed myself so much to the point where I could list it. But when I was speaking about it, there was an emotional charge that came with it, and I still had demons attached to those points of trauma in my life.
So I don't know if we haven't really met much before, but I am actually a psychotherapist, and I also work with women's aid for about 14 years. So I have a huge understanding of, you call it the point of trauma, and I would refer it to unprocessed trauma.
Yeah, absolutely unprocessed. Yeah, completely unprocessed. And I've done a lot of PTSD therapy and like kind of finger waving with my current therapist at the moment. And it's helped me a lot. It's helped me a lot to have a clearer mind, to not have emotional charges attached to the points of trauma. You know, I've even done things where I've gone back to situations and driven to places and gone back to streets and made contact with people from the past, just to ask
to desensitize yourself in some way.
Yeah, just to kind of maybe a bit of closure, I guess. My brain, you know, I've been I'm going through a diagnosis of high functioning autism as well, and the autism spectrum part was being convoluted with the trauma part, and I didn't know the difference between the two. And it's only now that I've started to process the trauma more that my kind of the spectrum part of my brain is able to come to light a bit more, and I can kind of control it and understand it better, rather than just kind of lashing out or being told I was this angry but smart little boy. That's what I kept getting referred to.
Well, the trauma has to go somewhere, and like most people, you just did avoidance and you did numbing out and you put your attention elsewhere. And now it's great to hear that you have great insight and you have more understanding and hopefully some compassion for what you called the angry, horrible young man.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can refer back to him now and understand. I mean, I got a question on a podcast recently about what would I go back and say to the 10-year-old Adam if I had a chance to go back. And I started crying, and I just said I wouldn't say anything to him. I'd just give him a hug.
Yeah.
And I would never have reacted that way before. I would have gone back and say this, like save money, or don't walk out on jobs and stuff like this. But he needed a hug, and he needed emotional attachment. He needed consistency. He needed structure, and I was creating chaos in my life because I was thriving that. And it's only now that I've become a 35-year-old father and a homeowner that I've realised just how important that is, especially for my children, and how much I didn't have it in my life.
So how did you manage to turn it all around?
I didn't manage. I think that's one of the very key things is, I've spent 10 years since the act of trying to end my life, really working on myself. There's no kind of epiphany moment. There's no kind of life-changing event. It was a series of steps that I took. First of all, I started working on myself, mentally, physically, changing my diet. I'm a plant-based environmental activist. I've always been environmental kind of activist from a young age, and I think when I founded the project in 2013, it allowed me to channel a lot of my energy. That I have a lot of energy. I'm always very, very kind of oversensitized to kind of everything around me, and I'm always thinking of things, and my brain never switches off. And now I'm able to put that into something with positive outcomes rather than a self-destructive outcomes, which is what I was doing before. So, for example, if my friends wanted to go out for a quiet drink, I'd end up on a plane in Thailand spending thousands of pounds on alcohol and drugs. I was never the one just to go out and have a quiet drink or just do something simple. It was always
to excess then.
Extremes, yeah, of everything. I was not a very good person to be around. Whereas now, somebody says, "Oh, let's do this," and I go, "Yeah, let's go do this," and go off on wild tangents. But I've fed 13 million people in 7 countries now in the past 7 or 8 years. So I'm able to put that energy into things that have got really positive outcomes. Mm-hmm. So that helped a lot with the kind of, especially with the energy and the kind of the physical stuff that I needed in life. But obviously, even then, becoming a CEO, becoming a founder of an organisation, there's still a lot that I had to work on for myself. And I was realising I was still making mistakes. I was still hurting people, just because I was seen as this figurehead or this public figure. I still wasn't right. I still had issues towards my children. I was struggling to have any affection with my son, especially, and in relationships as well. I was still struggling. I think I've had 3 or 4 relationships even during the time that I've been CEO of the Real Jeffrey Project, and I realised that I had to really step back and work on myself. So going to PTSD therapy, especially working on conflict resolution a lot more as well, not just with how I interact with people, but more about how I interact as myself. So not instantly replying to an email just because I don't agree with what somebody said, or stepping back from situations, being able to confront things with confidence and no emotional charge involved. And I've really, really worked so hard on that stuff. So
what you're seeing is that it's a journey, isn't it? It's a process. It's not an overnight fix, is it?
Yeah, and I think that, off the back of the post that you mentioned, I've had a lot of people come to me going, oh, my sibling or my relatives, suicidal, can you speak to them? I'm like, no, I can't speak to them. I'm not a trained therapist. I don't have any answers. What I'm trying to explain to people is that there is a way out, but there are certain steps that you have to take. And the first one is, allow yourself to be vulnerable. That was one of the most crucial things I had to do. I had to accept that I wasn't always right. I had to accept that people have different opinions to me. And I had to allow myself to be vulnerable. And, that's a really tough thing, especially from a male, in a very male dominated world, especially in the catering and hospitality. It's frowned upon to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to be
and I think for me, from a therapist point of view, when somebody used to come to a session, they were very angry. the anger just really covers up all the hurt and disappointment.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. And I was obviously, it was a facade for me, you know, this class clown all the way to growing up and being this stupid.
It's easier to be angry, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much easier, and it's much easier to kind of to act on it as well. You know, that's what people expect from you, so that's what you go and do, and you kind of get a reputation for it, and therefore you kind of dwell on that reputation, and you allow it to become you. And then really all it's doing is wasting you away inside, and you're not dealing with anything. And yeah, to the point where
it comes to a price, really, doesn't it? Being angry all the time.
Yeah, it's absolutely out of you. There's no need for it. You know, we have a hashtag now called kindness, which is part of the project that we do. We've got a warehouse called kindness, and everything we do is kindness. And you know, and that was a lot to do with the therapy side of things, of just going, you know what, just be kind to people and just be kind to yourself.
I was going to say, but it kind of needs to start with ourselves, doesn't it? We can be kind to other people. It's so much harder to be kind to ourselves.
It's a misconception, and I did a speech on kindness recently, and people were expecting me to say, you know, be kind to your neighbour, be kind to each other, be kind to people who are less than you. And I didn't say anything like that. I just said, you've got to be kind to yourself, because if each one of us was kind to ourselves, then the other stuff would come naturally to us. We would be kind to one another, we would be kind to our neighbours, we would be kind to people less than us, because we're already kind to ourselves. We wouldn't allow things like this to happen, or these situations to arise. And I think a lot of people didn't expect me to have that kind of position on kindness.
But it's true, isn't it? It's always an inside job, the work, isn't it? And it starts with ourselves. And if we're all coming from a better, connected, grounded, kinder place, we're going to be better humans.
Well, exactly, and we'll interact better as humans as well, and we'll have more appreciation for the world around us and our environments, and obviously that will have a bigger impact on the planet and everything that's going on at the moment currently.
So your awareness really started with food waste when you were in Australia, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been a chef for several years, so I knew about food. I had a good knowledge of food and how the hospitality industry dealt with food. And then obviously the environmental stuff that came with that didn't quite materialise until I got to Australia in 2012. And I started working on farms and started seeing how the kind of the supply chain further up from hospitality was dealing with food. And that was all the way from production to logistics to waste and redistribution.
And you wanted to change the world, but somebody said to you, you can't change the world until you change your hometown first. So you went back to Leeds to make the changes.
Exactly. I stood on a field in North Shepperton in Melbourne, outside of Melbourne, sorry. And it was 22nd of February 2013, and I just stood there and said, I'm going to create the Real Jump Project. I'm going to feed the world. I don't know where it came from. I was out in the middle of a desert bashing trees. And then I went to some other farms, and I was trying to explain to people what I was about to do. And I went to start it in Australia, and I was then no intention of coming back whatsoever. And I was on a farm with Hare Krishnas doing some volunteering work, and one of the leaders came up to me, and he just, you know, I was sat on a hill, I remember, overlooking this lake, and he came up to me and, you know, he said, I've heard about your idea and it's really, really good what you're trying to do. And there was something already similar happening within these kind of religious and faith-based communities, where they were feeding people communally, where everybody sat down together, cross-legged, feeding each other. And the Sikhs have obviously been doing it for millennia, and I've witnessed this as well. I said, I want to incorporate this back into kind of modern day life and maybe commercialize it in a sense that isn't about making profit, but more about people and the planet first. And he just said to me, you can't feed the world unless you feed your hometown first. And he just said it and walked off. And I just thought, wow. And I must have sat there for about 4 hours on this hill going, he's completely right. And he put everything into perspective for me. And he, you know, what it meant for me was I'd gone to Australia for the wrong reasons. I'd run away from all my problems rather than dealing with them. And I couldn't get any further away from Leeds than Australia.
We can't really run away from ourselves, can we? However far we go.
And I had to come back. And I had to come back, and I had to face my problems. I had to face my past. And I had to implement the project here as well, rather than doing it in another country, because it'd still be some form of escapism. It wouldn't have been done for the right reasons. So I literally came back to the doorstep of where I was born and bred and did it in Leeds. And yeah, I got a cafe, and everything just, you know, materialised from there. Really.
The cafe has a lovely concept, isn't it? It's pay what you feel.
Pay as you feel, yes. So pay as you feel is a concept where anybody can come and have access to food. That's whether they consume the food or they take the food away for their groceries, and they can pay whatever they want. So they can pay with money, time, or skills. But the key elements of pay as you feel was never about being financially sustainable. It was always about valuing food and valuing people. So I believe that everybody on the planet has a basic human right to have access to food, and there's plenty of food to feed all of us. So what value do you place on food? Well, we know the price of food because we can go to a supermarket and work it out, but what's the value of food, especially food that's been shipped in from all over the world, a lot of resource heavy, labour intensive foods, and I just didn't think that people understood the value of it, and especially the value of waste, in terms of preventing it from going to waste and not just landfilling it or not just burning it. And then obviously the other part of it was, just because you didn't have money doesn't mean to say you shouldn't have access to food. So I allowed people to give their time and skill as well to get access to food. And it's grown exponentially across the world as the concept. And I think it's literally because it was a beautiful concept that was very, very simple, which just connected people again back with their food.
So there's now these cafes all over the world now, from the one that you started.
Yeah, in 2016, which was the height of the network, there was 126 cafes in 7 countries across the world, which was like Israel, South Korea. We've still got one in Berlin, a couple in France, and then the majority of them were in the UK. And it was just basically people coming to me saying that they like the concept, could they copy it? And we just allowed them the autonomy to go away and do that. And
it's all the food, it's food that would have been thrown away otherwise.
Yeah, it's all surplus food that we use. There's some cost involved, some of it we get for free, but we've grown, exponentially. Even just from March last year, we were doing something around 1,000 tons a year, and I think we did 1,000 tons in the first 3 months of lockdown. So we did a year's worth of food just in that amount of time, and we've grown massively even in the last year, just as a concept, because of all the food that's become available and all the obviously people that needed access to it. But yeah, all the food is what we call it intercepted, and it's the point of where it would have become waste, but it's still edible. It just cannot be sold.
Is that because it's past the sell-by date, or?
There's lots of reasons. It could be things like it's surplus to requirements, accidental damage. It could be things like labelling issues. It could be an end of a barcode.
Hang on, that one makes me really angry. Labelling issues. So the food is absolutely fine, but the label's not.
Yeah, again, that's what I mean by saying it cannot be sold. So it might be,
tricky, isn't it?
From a brand value perspective, yeah, that it can't be sold. So it's things like, I've seen some of the most intricate mistakes that you can imagine that nobody would notice, and the brand value doesn't allow it to be sold or to be assigned to that brand, and therefore, yeah, it's wasted. And I'm not talking about a little bit of bread or fruit and veggie. I'm talking warehouses full of pallets of food that's written off because of.
And if you hadn't intercepted this food, they would have just thrown it away. You would have just gone.
Well, it's more difficult now. Back in 2011, 2012, it saw the rise of waste costs associated with food waste, and especially now more and more things around like glass jars and glass bottles. It's much more expensive to dispose of these things responsibly. So there's a few options in place. There's one called anaerobic digestion, where they can turn it into energy and turn it into fertilizer. There's obviously there is some food that goes to livestock, but obviously because of the foot and mouth disease, that's stopped. So the capacity and cost involved in doing something responsible with this surplus food is much difficult now than ever before. So yeah, they can't just send it to landfill, even though landfill still exist, and the cost of that is increasing. So now there's a big emphasis on redistribution and supporting charities, and obviously now because of the need, there's more and more charities and people out there than ever before who need access to it. So it's kind of a saving grace really for the food industry that there was such need, because I dread to think what would have happened to that food otherwise.
And right now this interview is being recorded during lockdown. When it's out, hopefully we may well be out of lockdown and corona will be a thing of the past, because we'll all be vaccinated. But obviously in the news recently we've seen the lunch packs that parents have been given for their kids, and it is appalling. I can't believe that there's a pepper that's cut in half, or a tomato that's cut in half. What do you think they could do with their 15 or their 30 pounds?
Yeah, the hardest thing about that is that I'm really closely linked to a lot of school caterers. I also work with a lot of schools, and the reality of the situation is bad, but it's not entirely accurate. Some of the pictures that we saw going around on social media were not entirely accurate, and some were. And some of the caterers, there is one or two that did try to get away with giving not as much food. whereas others went above and beyond and tried to give a lot, and they were the things that we didn't quite see. And I work with a lot of those companies that kind of got tarred with the same brush. But fundamentally, something went wrong, and children were still going without food. Families are suffering, and at the moment, the emphasis is to redivert surplus food to these people. But I believe that we should be segregating the two. I don't believe we should be tackling poverty with environmental issues. I think we should be separating the two and tackling food waste as an environmental issue, because we could feed all the poor and needy and vulnerable people on the planet, and there will still be food being wasted. Yes. So we can't try to tackle both problems by sustaining them together into one. We need to tackle them both at the root of the cause. And for me, we need to look further back and go, why do we have children go to school hungry? Why do we have parents that can't afford to put food on the table? Not let's just plaster over cracks by giving them some kind of food hamper. Because I can assure you that come December 2021, when we start talking about the Christmas holidays and food hampers, the same situation will be definitely happening again, and children will still be suffering, and families will still be going without, and there will still be food going to waste. So at the moment, politically, we're seen to be reactive, but it is just literally a plastering over cracks, and these cracks are getting bigger and bigger in society right now. So I think we really, really need to step back and start putting some groups of people together, can start looking at the fundamentals of why these things are happening, and start trying to tackle them at the root cause, because otherwise it'll get to a point where it's out of control.
And what do you think we can do to tackle it? What is the way out of this situation?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, there isn't a simple one answer solution to it all. There's lots and lots of things that need to happen, but first and foremost, I think it all comes down to education, and it comes down to being more associated, having better relationships with our food, for budgeting around what we spend our food on, because I eat plant-based foods, and I know that I can go buy a tin of chickpeas and some fruit and vegetables and put a decent meal together.
I forgot to say that your cafe is vegan, isn't it?
Yeah, one of our cafes is a plant-based cafe. Yeah, and yeah, so we focus really heavily on the kind of nutrition, and obviously because of the amount of fruit and vegetables going to waste, it's really, really easy to be plant-based kind of a food establishment, because there's so much of it available, and we get access to some incredible produce. We don't really get access to meat and fish a lot more, because the risk involved is so high anyway, even for redistributed food. So it actually suits us to do it that way. But yeah, I think first and foremost, we've got to start looking at our relationship with food and our education, and why children are leaving schools and not knowing how to make a meal or to where food comes from. I think is something that we're missing fundamentally, because these people are going to be the next consumers and the next students and the next workforce, and they don't understand what they're putting into their bodies.
I noticed a huge difference, and my youngest one is 19. I'm about 20 years older than you, but I did home economics at school, and we started from scratch. And she did home economics, which she got an A for, but the pastry was brought in. You know, we learned to make it from scratch, or we made a cake, or she'd make something else and they'd open a tin, but we would always start from scratch and learn how to make it. So yeah, the days I think of kids learning with their mums or their grandmas, we need to bring these days back, you know, how to bake or how to cook or how to make soup. Or
I know we're very, very fortunate still that we've got a post-war generation that's still with us, who knew about dig for victory and grow your own and rationing, and you know I hear some incredible stories from some of the older generations around how their mum would keep, or a parent would keep a tin of salmon in the cupboard in case somebody came around and it didn't have a date on it, and they'd use it in case somebody came around as a kind of treat. We don't have that relationship anymore. We also have a generation who were born in the 90s, who have grown up and only known supermarkets and only known dates on food, and we're very, very close to losing the generation from the post-war and having only people on the planet that only know about supermarkets and only know that. I go into schools and children tell me that they think that apples come out of plastic bags. I've literally had children tell me that, and for me, that's the epitome of what's going on with our society right now, because you need to eat to live. You don't need a computer, you don't need a phone, you don't need a TV, you need to eat to live. And if we are manipulated into believing that we can get a mobile device and tap a button and food arrives on our doorstep in the next 30 minutes, or you can tap a button and food is delivered to you from the local supermarket, and you can just have it delivered and you can just sit there and ordering this stuff, you have absolutely no relationship with your food or what you're putting into your body. And I think that's a really, really dangerous precedent to set.
Hopefully, we've seen in lockdown, a lot of more people are now growing their own and learning to cook, because there's been a lot of bread makers. I mean, people laugh about it, but I think a lot of people are now, because they are home, they're not going out, we can't go out, they are doing more home cooking. I've always been brought up on home cooking, so I always like to just use, you know, one ingredient only and to make my meals. I've always liked to make home food, and it's always been a rule of mine that we all stand together and
Yeah.
eat around the table. And I think that's just, it's simple, but it's so important, isn't it?
It is, it's what, you know, if you think of the TV dinners from the 90s, I mean, I was born in 85, but I grew up in the 90s, and, you know, you're all sat around with a microwave meal on your knee watching TV, and then after that, you know, games consoles and mobile devices, you know, started coming into our lives, to the point now where, you know, I sit around with my children, we sit around a table together, and it seems strange, you know, even though that I've been brought up on it and that we're doing it, because I know that so many of us don't. I don't see it in everyday lives. We're so busy, we eat convenience food, we work different shift patterns, and I just truly believe that it is heavily related to how functional families and how we interact with one another in society. And you know, I think it's something that we need to start looking back. People are afraid of looking backwards. I think that we should be just focusing on going forward. But I believe there's some incredible things that we used to do that maybe we should bring back. That was fundamental to society and our family lives.
Yeah, and well, I'm from a Jewish family, so our life centers around food. So always on a Friday night, we always have, you just have more, as many people you can fit around the table in the days when we could have visitors, and we just feed people. So to me, food is really about love as well. And
absolutely, and kindness and love and sharing and gratefulness and all these things that come, the attributes that come with food and the power of food. We've lost it in society, and I don't honestly think that it's not a consequence, a coincidence, sorry, that there is a breakdown in society when it comes to functional families and behaviour in children, and we've got loads of referral units now, you know, and I think a lot of it is related to food and what we're putting into our bodies, and maybe there's not enough work being done on it, but I've seen the impact of it, of what it does.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, I'm driving my kids to school, and you see kids walking along the street with a bottle of, well, in Scotland, iron brew and a Mars bar on the other hand, and you know, that's breakfast.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, isn't it? And I don't think, you know, when I was a child, they were seen as treats. Now they're very accessible. So, you know, one of the answers to the questions that you asked me earlier about what to do, you know, the food industry has to stand up and take some responsibility, take a huge amount of responsibility. One, for what's going into our food right now, and secondly, for how accessible it is. Like I mentioned, there's applications now you can get where you can just instantly get any type of foods you would like. And I've seen documentaries of people who are ordering like 4 or 5 takeaways a day and just living off takeaways a week and spending who knows how much money on these things. And obviously, you know,
it's the money, and it's also all the salt and all the added stuff that they put into the takeaways,
and it has an impact on our brains. You know, if all you have to do is go to a supermarket, and every single aisle, at the end of every aisle, or at the end of every checkout, is just sugar and sweets and fat and salt, and it's just rubbish. You know, I'm a chef, and my partner's a nutritionist, and you know, we're both plant-based, and you know, we despise going into these places because we can just see from a distance. You know, I walk down aisles with my son, and he just says, "Daddy, sugar, 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 sugar." That's all he said. He doesn't point to crisps or pop or sweets. He just says sugar, sugar, sugar. I mean, he'll go straight to the fruit and veg. That's what he's been brought up on, and he loves eating cherries and blueberries and things like that. But you know, you just realise when you're walking on these places that very, very little of it is actually nutritionally good for us.
I grew up with quite an unusual mum, because she's been vegetarian. She's 80 now. She's been vegetarian maybe about 50 years. And when I was little, we never were allowed fizzy drinks, sweeties, chocolate, crisps, biscuits. And she would chop up little bits of pepper or raisins, and I would take them to school, and I thought they were sweets for a long time. But at 55, I've never had a filling. All of our teeth are fantastic, and still now I actually don't even, the thing, you know, to drink a fizzy drink doesn't even do it for me. It doesn't. I've got so many friends addicted to Diet Coke, you know, just one after the other. Couldn't drink it.
No, and it shows. I mean, you look fantastic, and obviously you say you know, you've got healthy kids, and you know, your mother is the age that she is. You know, it's not a coincidence at all. You know, we don't buy it, and water as well. You know, like you just said about fizzy drinks, we don't consume and drink enough water in our diets, and it's fundamental to our skin, you know, to our teeth, to our eyes, our hair, everything. And we drink this stuff that's, I mean, people, I have arguments with people about it all the time when they say, oh, but it's a diet, Pepsi, it's a diet Coke.
But then it's full of saccharin and all stuff.
Chemicals inside, yeah, it's ruining your body. Like, you can watch videos of people placing boiled eggs into these things and watching the shells disintegrate. What do you think it's doing to your insides? But yeah, people think the word diet and it's healthy, and it's been manipulated into society to make us believe that what we're putting into our bodies is good, and it really isn't.
No. How was it doing your TEDx talk?
So my TEDx talk,
excuse me.
I was preparing for it for nearly 9 months. They asked me for my speech 9 months prior to the actual event, and I did it, and I sent it to them, and it was kind of reworded and extended. And I remember on the day they got me to perform it, and obviously this is related back to the kind of autism part of me, but I stood on stage and I think I did a 10-minute speech in about 4 minutes. And they were like, you've got to really like slow down and extend it. And I was like, yeah, but I'm speaking to an auditorium full of seats. I don't speak to seats, I speak to people, and I will engage with them as and when on the day. And you know, I can't pre-perform and practice these things. You know, I've just got to go do it naturally and work with the crowd. And I'm very, very, you know, I learned that I was very good at it from doing my TED Talk, and that was the first kind of major speech that I'd done. But I remember walking around the Warwick University where I was doing it, and I must have gone through the speech several hundred times in my head and just tried to memorize it. And then when I got onto stage, I had a piece of paper, A4 paper on the floor next to the microphone with just some kind of bullet points just to try and put things into chronological order. If I was going off track, I could refer back to things and keep on track. And it was meant to be a good reference point. As soon as I got to that microphone, as soon as I was live, everything just went out of my head. Okay. And I just spoke, and I just said exactly what I wanted to say. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time, there's people behind me, I could see them kind of tucked behind the curtains with little microphones and headphones on a bit, thinking, oh no, what is he saying? Like, this wasn't what he said. But
it looks like that. It looks like you're just standing there speaking from your heart. I have watched it, and you can see that.
Yeah, and that's what I think came to life, is that when I was put in front of an audience and I got given this opportunity to tell the world, not just my story, but what was really happening, you know, the facts, the reality of the situation that I'd been.
The facts were shocking when you said we waste 1 billion tons of food every year globally. That really.
Yeah, but even that is the figures that we get pushed down our throats from institutions and governments. But it's way worse than that. You know, that's only what we know about. I'm exposed to a lot of food that people are not aware of, or destinations and premises where food is stored that no one has ever heard of or seen of, or it's meant to disappear. And you know, and we just don't have the facts and figures. The figures that I mentioned was only what we know about from our data and our research. I know it's much worse than that. So when I got given this opportunity, I just said it. I just said, you know what, I'm probably never going to do a TED Talk again. I'm going to go up and I'm going to tell the world exactly what I have seen, what I've experienced. I'm going to tell them the truth. And obviously, then there was a couple of points where the audience laughed at me, and you know, I'm quite good at engaging with that. And I just went with it, and I did a full. I think it was like just over 10.5 minutes. I think I did. I think I got a part standing ovation as well from some people who thought it was incredible. But this was 2015. I'd only been on the project for 2 years. You know, we've now had it for 7 years. The impact is much greater now. I've had a much more exposed view of the food world, and obviously we've gone through a pandemic, and I've seen how fragile our food system really is, especially in this country, but also around the world as well.
Yeah. So we're kind of nearing to the end here of our interview today. Just before we sign off, how can people find out more about you? So
they can obviously go to our website, TRJFP.com, to find out more about us. We've got a lot of social media pages as well at the Real Junk Food Project. Where they can keep up to date with all the things that we do. We're very public facing. We interact with our customers on a daily basis, and you know, we're an approachable organisation. We don't hide behind the logo. So yeah, the easiest way is usually social media and a website. And when do we hope to get your book published? When is that coming out? So it's a 90,000 word autobiography. I'm doing 3,000 words a day, 30 chapters. So I'm hoping that by the end of February, I will have at least the first draft done, which I'll start teasing out into the real world. And we're still deciding on how we want to approach this. Off the back of the post again that you mentioned, the original post, somebody got in touch with me who is one person removed from Danny Boyle. And there's people, talking about it being turned into a film. So we need to understand, are we writing a book for it to become a film? Are we trying to write a book to tell people my story? What are we trying to do? And then also, in terms of publishing it, I'd like to do.
I think a book and a film would be good. Just do both.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but I want to make sure that I tell people my story, regardless if it becomes a film or not. I really want to try and get that across and trying to empower people. And the way that we publish it is going to be really interesting, because I want to do a pay-as-you-feel thing where people can download the book and they can choose to pay whatever they want from it, kind of fit in with what we've just spoken about. But also, I want to make sure that people that don't have money can still read my book, because I feel like it will support and help a lot of those people, as well as people who can afford it can also have access to it and can give back if they decide to as well. So there's some really, really interesting conversations to have around how we launch this book and in what context we do it.
And I look forward to be able to read it one day. And thank you so much for your time, and just keep on doing what you're doing. It is not just what you're doing with the food issue, but how you've turned your life around as well, and just keep doing the journey. You're doing an amazing job. So thanks, Adam, for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me, Madeline. I appreciate it.
Playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black.